How is it that society has not learned from history about the dangers of socialism, Marxism, ideology, etc. after years? How do Marxists get away with it? Well, let's not go with the dangers of ideology. Let's go with the dangers of, like to call it, radical left-wing ideology. Well, I think the reason for this, and this also might be the reason that there's a strange thing that the iconography of communism is still acceptable socially, whereas the iconography of Nazism isn't. Now, I'm not saying that we should make the icons of Nazism socially acceptable either. I think that the communist icons shouldn't be socially acceptable, but they are. And there's probably a reason for that, you know. Now, part of it is that the left has never taken on, the radical left has never taken responsibility for being on the same side as the Stalinists and the Maoists and the Cambodian murderers and all of that. So that's part of it. But then the next part is I think there's something deeper. I think that, you know, inequality is a reality. And it's a reality that cannot be put at the feet of capitalism or at the feet of human political structure. There's a good book, you guys might want to read this, called The Great Leveler by Walter Scheidel. And it's a new book, and it's a study of inequality. And one of the things he does is do an empirical analysis of the relationship between inequality, the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality, and the ideological position of governments. So here's the theory. The hypothesis would be, well, because the left-wingers are concerned with inequality, if you measured inequality in under left-wing governments and you measured inequality under right-wing governments, you'd expect a reduction in inequality under left-wing governments. And the results are no difference. And so what does that mean? It doesn't mean that left-wings are hypocrites, although it might mean that because people can be hypocrites. But what it means is the problem of inequality is so intractable that we don't know of any appropriate political, sociological, or economic solutions that actually work. It's a real catastrophe. Now, inequality in itself might not be a bad thing unless it's too extreme. It's extreme when people say start to starve, and then clearly something's, you know, it's very difficult to. I think everyone would agree that that's a suboptimal outcome. You know, we don't need to get all ideological about that. But some degree of inequality is useful because, well, it gives people something to strive for. It gives them an up, right? It means, I was thinking about this, sometimes you actually want people to be rich because if a new product is introduced into the market, there have to be people around who have substantial pools of capital to be able to afford it when it's still novel. And then that market brings the price down for everyone else. And so if everyone had exactly the same income, it would be very difficult to introduce expensive products into the market with the hope that their price would plummet. That actually is a big deal. You want large pools of capital sitting around too so that people can invest in very, very complex things. And you also want large pools of capital to be in the hands of private individuals so that there's forces that are powerful that are competitive with the government and with other large organizations. So anyways, though, back to the Marxists, despite the fact that there are reasons for inequality, and despite the fact that you can't lay the fact of inequality at the feet of capitalism, and despite the fact that capitalism also appears to be making everyone not absolutely poor at the same time as it makes some people very rich, inequality is still a painful reality, and no one really likes it. You know, I mean, you can lord it over someone, I suppose, and extract out some sense of your moral superiority because you happen to occupy a hierarchical position that's higher, and sometimes there's some validity in that, especially if you've earned it. Although I would say, like, glorying in it is probably a suboptimal outcome. It's still the case that inequality violates a moral intuition that everyone has, I think, and that's probably the moral intuitions that lie along the agreeable axis. It's like, well, wouldn't it be better if everyone had enough? It's like, well, who argues with that? You know, I mean, everyone feels that way. And so I think a thoughtless compassion makes Marxism naively attractive. And I'm not being cynical about that, because there is some utility in naive agreeableness. But unfortunately, the world is a very complicated place. And merely wanting to be nice about things and wishing that everything was fair doesn't justify imposing an equity outcome and gerrymandering complex economic systems that will bite you if you mess with them because you're ideologically possessed. I am 46, retired executive, wealthy, competent, and full of juice. Who can I talk to if I want to invest time/money/energy in your university? Lots of people are asking me such things, and it's very much appreciated. It's weird, because you'd think that if people are offering you time and money, that it would be a straightforward thing to say, yes, please climb aboard and help. But it's not that simple, because first of all, I don't want to involve people in something that I can't be sufficiently committed to. It's not fair to them. And it isn't obvious to me how I can be committed to this yet, fully committed to it. And so I'm sort of playing with it at the level that I can manage. It's not like it's a game. We have a good product involved, or a good product in motion at the moment. But I don't have the wherewithal to scale at the moment. And, you can say, and people who are developing new businesses like to do this, like let's say I could come up with a draft business plan for an online university, and then I could contact people like you, Paul, and say, look, I'm ready to gather investments, and let's say I could raise $20 million, or let's say I could raise $200 million. Then I have a new problem. The problem is, well, oh my God, I've got all this money, now I have to figure out something to do with it. And that's actually a really big responsibility. It's not like, it's a success catastrophe, let's say. It's a first world problem. I get all that, but that doesn't mean that it isn't real. So I have to do a lot more thinking and planning and figure out how to disperse my time most effectively before I dare to take on any additional people who would like to help. Now, once my organization is in a place where that sort of help would be useful, then I'll make a public announcement, and I would be more than happy for people to jump on board, let's say, climb on board, start pushing, devote resources, all of those things. I'd be happy for that to happen then, but I don't want to do it prematurely, because I don't want people to risk their valuable resources in an endeavor that isn't yet solid. So, all right, so I'm only going to do, I think, one more question. I am a sober alcoholic/drug addict. How can I find my way back to belief in a higher power after 10 years in the empty void of atheism? I'm falling apart. Well, I would say your best bet is to actually start devoting some time to it. For me, I became convinced of the validity of a religious viewpoint, I think, as a consequence of study. Read Joseph Campbell. Read Carl Jung. Jung's hard. Campbell's a good introduction, though. Mircea Eliade as well. I don't know if you can find your way back to belief, but you might be able to find your way back to meaningful engagement, and that's a better way of thinking about it. The belief thing is a really tricky one. People ask me, do you believe in God? And I really think, how dare you ask that question? I think that's really what I think. But on a more prosaic level, I usually think, well, I don't know what you mean by belief. I don't know what you mean by belief. And I don't know what you mean by God. These are very difficult questions, and none of that's self-evident. Now, I would say, do I believe in the crucifixion? Well, certainly. I mean, people, the crucifixion, how can you not believe in it? If you think symbolically, it's like human beings we're eternally crucified, right? Our lives are tragic and they end in death, and we're all betrayed. We're all betrayed. We all experience betrayal. So you can't not believe in the crucifixion. Do you believe in the resurrection? Well, people die and are reborn all the time. You know, they go through, this is what you're after here. I'm a sober alcohol drug addict. Well, you know, you had to let a lot of you die when you stopped being an addict and something new be reborn. It's like, well, what's the ultimate significance of that? And how is it tied to the notion of bodily resurrection? Well, I don't know what the ultimate significance is, but it does seem to be the pathway through life. To believe, I would say you start believing not by attempting to convince yourself that the statement, there is a God, is true, like a fact is true, but to act out the proposition that you should shoulder your cross and stumble uphill towards the city of God. That's belief, man. And you can do that right away. Now, you might ask, well, do I have any guarantee that that has transcendent and universal significance? It's like, well, it's not a bad model for emulation, so it has universal significance in that regard. We each have to shoulder the tragedy of our existence and stumble upwards despite that. That has universal significance. Does it have significance outside of life? And like at the eternal realm? It wouldn't surprise me if it did. I suppose it depends on what you mean by the eternal realm. It seems to have significance in the eternal realm of consciousness. It seems to have significance in the eternal realm of unconscious fantasy, implicit fantasy, and mythology. How is it connected with the factual world? That's a hard question, because the factual world, in some sense, divorced itself from that transcendental world during the development of the scientific methodology. So, never the twain shall meet. It's a methodological issue in part. I think you probably have to draw on the same forces that enabled you to sober up and abandon your drug addiction. You know, something was guiding you forward. Go forward again. Go forward again as if there is a higher power. That's your manifestation of faith. Go forward again as if being is benevolent and God is good. That's the hallmark of courage. And that's a good place to stop. Thank you all for showing up today, and for all the support. And that's enough for March 4th, 2018. Bye-bye.